Hi everybody, this is Marcel again with another live episode of Everyday Leadership. I have a wonderful session lined up for you today. I'm so excited. First thing, I'm calling in from Toronto, Canada, early in the morning. It is 7 a.m. over here, and it's going to be 7 p.m. in Singapore, where my next guest is. My next guest is Manish Arneja. He is from the Resilience Institute. And just something really interesting about Manish is we actually met years ago during a corporate workshop, and we'll hear more about that. But he has since then really taken the resilience brand, especially with regards to the Resilience Institute, which is doing groundbreaking work in research in resilience and running programs and things like that. And I invited Manish to come online today with us because I think today, especially with regards to leadership, resilience is a key element in leadership. And you know that my opinion about leadership is that leadership is not just privy to the few people on top of in an organization, the C-suite people and all of that kind of stuff, but leadership is really for everybody, right? And every single one of us in some aspects of our lives, we are leaders, or we need to be leaders, and so leadership applies to every single one of us, and because of that, so too is resilience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Manish in on the conversation here. So I'm pulling him in. Here we go. All right, Manish, you are now live. Everybody can see you, and welcoming you to our show. Thank you so much for joining me today. And so we'll just start off the conversation. Of course, everybody knows me, so that's easy. But
thank you for having me here. I'm pleased to join you in your everyday leadership session.
Oh, it's I always have so much fun with these things, but I always like to start off with maybe just kind of giving us a little bit of a background of your story, right? Where you're from, what's driven you here, and what's gotten you to this point.
Interesting. So my story, I grew up in India. I lived for first 20 years of my life in India, in Delhi. So some of the viewers you said are from India. So hello everyone over there. And after that, I realized that I worked in hospitality for a couple of years, and I realized this is not what I want to do. So I ventured out to study further, and I spent 5 years in the Philippines studying, and then from there I did my MBA, and my journey took me to FMCG companies, which is started with Diageo, where I worked in an alcohol company where it sells Johnny Walker, Bailey's, Smirnoff, etc. And from moving from Diageo, I moved from all the way to UK. And in the UK, I worked with various other companies, including Diageo, Ernst & Young, SAB Miller, and for myself. So if I would say my career has spanned, in the UK and in Philippines, spend a lot of time in the change management field. I used to run change programs, restructuring programs. My work would take me to Poland, Romania, Portugal, working with beer factories, or buying Kettle One, which is a brand of alcohol. So that's where my journey was. And in 2012, we and my wife moved to 2013. We moved to Singapore. I continued that journey working for British American Tobacco. So from one vice industry to another vice industry in tobacco, which is cigarettes, and then I moved to milk, which is Fonterra. Now, over that journey, most of the time period I worked in change, and how we worked on change projects is, drive change, and how the leaders can support the change for the teams, how the sponsors can be more impactful, how can we drive communication within the business. And I realized that first, my my curiosity was that it's not working for a few reasons. One, I was not fully aligned to that philosophy that you keep driving change and come with some messages, and people are struggling because one project finishes and one person is dealing with 5 or 6 projects and they have hundreds of things to handle. So what I realize is it's not actually the change management that people need to focus on. It's not only the way they drive the messages, the way they connect, or the way they communicate, or the way they manage their process changes is also very much dependent, what I call, is the capacity of the people. Mm-hmm. Now, in change management, when we talk about readiness of change, one of the key factor is how is the capacity of my people. And what I realize is in the same change project, Marcel, you would know that one person would thrive, would be doing really well, mm-hmm. moving from one change to the other. They'd be the first person to come as an SME, subject mm-hmm. matter experts for the project, and some companies will struggle. So what I found, that took me to a lens to move from change management field to focus on people. Mm-hmm. And how to help people to bring their capacity to a higher level so that regardless of changes, they can manage it. Yeah. And that in Fonterra, I got introduced to Resilience Institute, and then the journey went on. So last 3 years I've been with them, and I really enjoy what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I think we can talk a lot on how change management versus developing resilience is different. But I think these fields will merge soon. Somehow.
The funny thing is, I've been doing this for 10 years now, right? And 10 years ago, right, when I was doing my master's in neuroscience and leadership, of course, a lot of leaderships change, right? Like, nobody needs to be led to do things the same, right? Exactly. Usually leadership is change, right? And I remember, because I don't come from a corporate background, right? I was a personal trainer before this, so you can imagine, me being, doing my master's and as a personal trainer in a leadership type, kind of environment with CEOs and of course executive coaches and all of these kind of people. And the funny thing is as everybody was talking back then, because 10 years ago was just after the big crash in 2008, and everybody was talking about, how change, right? How do we manage change? And that was my first question with regards to capacity, right? It's if people don't have the capacity to apply themselves, if they're exhausted, if they're if they're poorly nourished, if they're stressed out, if they're not sleeping, they're all of these kind of things, how can their brains have the capacity to rewire themselves to be able to do things differently, right? It just
absolutely you're spot on.
Yeah, and I was like, this doesn't make sense. And then if you look at like all of the kind of the change management models, right? There's very little conversation around, hey, let's measure and let's make sure that our people are actually ready to change, right? So there doesn't seem to be an appreciation of readiness. And we know from coaching, right? Is that, you can't coach somebody who's not ready to be coached. Right, so and if somebody's not ready, they're not ready. So there seems to be this whole rush, right, of like change needs to have this kind of end point, right, where it's like listen, this is where we want to be with change. This is what we want to achieve out of this change, and it's such an unrealistic thing to do because change is constant, right? It's like gravity, right? How much gravity do you really want, right? It's not going to work that way.
Here is, Marcel, you hit the. It's like leaders we want to go to this destination. Let's say in Singapore, I'm in Bukit Timah and I want to go to, and that's my destination. And how do we get there? But nobody knows that in their car, do they have the fuel or not? Change management is, do we have the passengers? But do the passengers, do they have the fuel in the car, or do they want to go in the journey? So it's not there. And even if you look at the change readiness tools, it's all talk about have you spoken to, have you been
Yeah.
spoken to, and even engagement models.
Mindset, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
mindset stuff, like what your opinions, and doing surveys, and like do you want to do it, right? All of that kind of stuff, but not necessarily from a kind of a hardwired, kind of, especially for, of course, in my field, looking at it from a neuroscience perspective, right? The brain needs energy to be able to change, and where's that energy going to come from, right? So just at a biological level, that change management conversation doesn't work if we're not looking out for those kind of things. Yeah, and so for me early on, I kind of came to this realization that if you're looking at performance, right, an organizational performance, it's a multi-layer kind of thing, right? It's like a ladder, and at the foundation of that ladder, right, is not performance or skill, right? It's simply your wellness, right? How you're taking care of yourself, because that's going to build the energy in your brain, and once and when you have that, that's when your resilience levels go up, right? And
Yeah.
so right, and then once your resilience levels go up, that improves your motivation, and when your motivation is becomes better, right, you become a kind of a more positive source of energy within your surroundings and your organization. I like to call them energy donors versus energy vampires, right?
Nice.
And if you want to be an energy donor, a positive energy donor, you need to have that resilience, because otherwise you're not going to be able to motivate and inspire people, and therefore you're not going to be able to apply yourself with skills, and therefore also with greater performance, right? So yeah, so absolutely. So when I've known about the Resilience Institute for a few years now, right? So just of course from Sven Hansen's work and things like that, and some great research. Tell me a little bit about kind of how the Resilience Institute works, and kind of like some of their kind of focus points, because I think that will be really interesting for the audience.
I'll go back to the previous story in terms of change capacity. What I really got fascinated by is that Sven and the team earlier in 2002 had created a diagnostic to measure people's capacity of, or we call it resilience levels.
Okay.
And on 60 factors, which is around when they are not at their best, and they are not fragile and fatigued and tired, and with cognitive load, with lots of mental chatter, sleep delays, etc. And also some assets such as physical energy, emotional, physiological capacity, mental capacity, spiritual capacity. And I got attracted to it, and what we found is people have a ratio of how much their assets are compared to their liabilities. And what we do in the Resilience Institute is we first start our programs is to measure everyone. Now, the big articles which are coming up from Harvard Business and stuff, they said in this COVID situation, in this challenging times, the first thing leaders needs to do is to measure the people resilience. So that's what we do really well, and there is no, I would say I'm very proud that there's no other tool in the other competitive landscape that measures mental health, physical vitality, emotional intelligence, cognitive characteristics, as well as spiritual, which is purpose, meaning, flow, etc., that drives people. So, and my personal example is some of the coaches, like you may have, we talked about, if their resilience ratio is 1.1 or less than 1, that the person is very fragile to not only deal with change, but tragedies in their life. And my personal resilience, when I started in 2016, my ratio was 1.4, and it changes every time, but before COVID, it was 3.2. So, and I know how I easily navigated this time period, because I know that it's everyday leadership. I'm sleeping well, I'm energized, I have positive emotions, my mindset is more optimistic, I'm doing what I'm love to do. So I would be able to find the way. So all the programs are designed behind this diagnostic in terms of measuring it, and how we can build people to a higher level of scores where they can improve their assets and lower their liabilities. And it starts with everyday leadership. because that's a great title. Because what we found is that nobody can come and say, we can come to our session today and say, you want to build resilience, let's do it, and you get inspired by a talk and nothing will change, because it happens on every single day with 5 minutes practices, 2 minutes practices, having a glass of water, sleeping at the time ritual, having those 5 push-ups, going for a walk, smiling in a webinar, or whatever that is. All these minute rituals are the key. And when people come and realize, and you talked about neuroscience quite a bit, so would love to get your perspective in so much research the researchers have done on smile, on terms of positive emotion, on terms of posture, on terms of greens, on terms of walk, on terms of walking in the bare feet in the grass, on diaphragmatic breathing, on various practices. If I can think of 300 practices, I can list at least 100 now, and I'm sure you can do. But how many do it? Because they think I would take care of myself as a last. I'll take care of my wife, my kids, my dog, my team, but they are inside. They are not managing their own thoughts. They are going against them. Emotions are running wild. Physical energy is fragile. So that's what I think, and I would love to get your perspective on what do you think of the small rituals and neuroscience practices that you would encroach on.
Oh, absolutely. You know what really, just from listening to this, and of course I talk to so many other people too. Is we all seem to be saying the same thing, right? And we're we're not reading from the same playbook. Right? It's like your experience has been very different from my experience, right? I come from the personal training industry, right? So but what's really interesting is that, with all the reading and the exposure that we've had to clients and all of that kind of stuff, doing this for many years, we've all kind of come to this same idea that, hey, listen, if you don't take care of yourself first, you don't have the capacity to take care of others, including your business, right? And it seems to be kind of this reverberating theme, but how many people really do that, right? And I think one of the reasons is because self-care is not sexy, right? I think in today's world,
delay it.
Yeah, exactly, right? I think in today's world still, the idea of sacrificing yourself for something that is greater than you are, right, is, for the brain, is a lot more novel and is a lot more sexy than saying, I'm going to take care of myself, right? I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to go to bed early, right? That's just not sexy. And the unfortunate thing is, from a neuroscience perspective, is that we are all emotional beings, right? We're all emotionally driven. And so it's that emotional part, that limbic brain, right? That emotional brain that dictates a lot of our decisions. We like to believe that we're rational beings, but in reality, we're actually very emotional beings. And so we are driven by a lot of these emotions. And the unfortunate thing is that emotional brain has no concept of time. It does not understand that there might be long-term unhealthy consequences to the short-term decisions that we might be making, right? And so in order for us to be able to apply the discipline, right, that we might need to be able to take care of ourselves, it requires a certain amount of willpower that comes from our prefrontal cortex, and that is highly dependent on energy. Yeah. And so and as energy, that's the unfortunate thing, right? It's kind of a vicious cycle, right? Because as energy levels in the brain drop, what happens is the brain then starts kind of prioritizing the more immediate resources required for survival, right? Which is all that fight or flight response and the limbic kind of caveman behaviors of feeding and and all of that kind of stuff. And so it'll the brain will then reduce the resources from the prefrontal cortex, which will make us increasingly more emotional in our decisions and stuff. And so what we call impulse inhibition, right? And in neuroscience, our ability to override impulsive thinking and impulsive decisions,
it's going to be hard.
becomes harder. That's why people, for example, coming from that personal training industry, I always use weight loss as an example, right? The person who's like every day tells themselves, oh man, I'm going to go on a diet and I'm going to take care of myself, and they have a long day of work and it's been really stressful. They've had to kind of resist themselves from losing their temper and choke holding their boss 5 times in a day. By the time they get home and the kids are running around and they're going crazy and there's they're just so exhausted that when they open the fridge and there's a choice between carrot sticks and chocolate cake, their brain is going, screw the carrot sticks, I'm going for the chocolate cake, right? And at that moment in time, because
their survival radars are on, and they are looking for, when adding to your story, when they go to the fridge and look for the chocolate, because the fear response, which is fear of missing out, is so high that I want to get this chocolate, because even if it's in the fridge tomorrow, your brain's saying it's going to disappear. Better take it now.
That's right. Exactly. And that too is exactly.
Limbic brain is active more than your PFC, as you mentioned.
Yeah, exactly. From an energy perspective, the prefrontal cortex has enough energy to light a light bulb, right? Which is quite a lot of energy. But the limbic system is like a nuclear power plant compared to that, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's at an unfair advantage. So yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so challenging for so many people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what to add in here, because a few days back I ran a session on rituals and habits, and what I wanted to add here, the one we really focus on practices, is because a PFC, prefrontal cortex, is very high consuming powerhouse, right? It runs on a huge amount of glucose, it runs on a huge amount of energy. So when you have set rituals and certain practices, that becomes automatic in the nervous system. It takes less energy. So
that's right.
Practices, the 4 minutes of practices of your meditation or smile, if it becomes like brushing your teeth, it becomes you. And the one example we were talking about is, let's say there are 2 jars. One jar is your personality, your everyday leadership with bad behaviors, and there's a small jar which has not much coins inside. Now, when you start to build rituals, it starts to get the momentum and takes you to the space where you can build leadership much easily in a stressful situation where you can stay calm. You're not impulsive. So the power of rituals and practices, and I totally agree, even if fitness perspective, you cannot, what our learning over Resilience Institute, 20 years, physical is a game changer. You cannot undermine the power of your physical rituals. Yeah. Yogis, for 2000 years, why they're using yoga is not for becoming the best person, because yoga is a place to reach emotional stability, mental coherence, as well as spiritual enlightenment. Your Buddha picture right behind you talks about it very clearly. But now we are talking about neuroscience. We are talking about in resilience. So if anybody wants to change and build resilience, my biggest practice would be take more breaks, go on time to sleep, and eat well. I think that would be a good starting point.
Oh, I totally agree, and especially, of course, in this period, right? In that COVID period where we're dealing with so much uncertainty, right? We know that uncertainty is a major stressor for the brain, and when people are kind of in these very uncertain times, it could potentially kind of gravitate towards making more impulsive type decisions, and kind of based around a really good example, and I'm not dissing the United States by any means, but there's a lot of news around people who when in the United States many states went in lockdown, right? A lot of people kind of revolted because they were saying, listen, my livelihood, right? I'm gonna starve because I can't work, which is an absolute valid emotional response. But the truth is, of course, what they're not really responding to is the actual fact that they're in lockdown. They're responding to the uncertainty that they are not able to see kind of what's going to be happening in the future, and so that uncertainty, what they then and want more than anything is some level of certainty. So it's like, give me my job back, give me money, because then at least I know I'm taking care of my family. I have that certainty, right? And the brain is very much driven on certainty. So a period like COVID is tremendously difficult for everybody, because there is so much uncertainty, whether it's your job, or whether it's your family, whether it's people potentially getting sick, and so I'm going to kind of make an assumption, right, that mental health at this point in time, across the globe, right, is probably suffering more than actual, COVID disease, right? There are probably many more millions of people suffering from mental health because of it.
The interesting thing is, with the COVID, people's attention has gone more outwards, and more and more consumption of media, more and more consumption of news, more and more consumption of what people are doing, what's happening in the countries, the statistics, and less awareness of themselves, and self-awareness is a route to resilience. Now, if I am always triggered, always focused on what's going outside, I have very minimal time to go inwards. And what my conclusion is that people have spent less time, and they're always in that space of impulse by stimulus and responding to that stimulus, responding to that. But they're not driving their thoughts. They're not driving their emotions the way they want it. They're driven by those things.
Yeah. We have a great question from Darian. Thanks Darian for asking a question. She's on LinkedIn. She's watching the show, and she's actually saying what we think about governments and big corporations in terms of how they should be part of kind of that corporate responsibility, right? With dealing with things like resilience and stuff like that. I think that's a great question, right? Because I've actually had this question many times, and I remember doing a keynote 6 years ago, a major car manufacturer, and one of the audience people asked the same question. And it created a debate within the company, which I thought was really good. So it is a great question. So thanks, Darian, for asking that. So Manish, what would you kind of feel about that, with regards to big companies and governments, kind of in the role they would play in all of this?
See, for me, I think it's a good question, Darren, but I would really honestly answer this question. I have started to give less opinions on things which are not of my parameters, and what I realized, it has made my life much simpler, especially with COVID. I realize I can't change the government. I can give some perspective, but it'll be a mental excitement for a certain time period. It is not taking me anywhere. So I really don't have the right answer. If I would be in government, if I would be dealing with it, I would have some perspective. Even same for organization. I can talk about organization because I can work closely with it. So from my perspective, what organizations start to do is to stay ahead of the curve, and staying ahead of the curve means to predict what those 3-4 years later organization employees will be looking for. So currently they are already about purpose. Purpose is a starting point of spiritual energy. That means my employee who are coming to work for me have a desire of connecting to a bigger self. Meaning, I need to explore that spiritual element a little higher for them to connect. Now, I don't know what that would look like for each organization. Some could open mindfulness centers. Some could be conscious companies that we work with, like Daane and all, AXA, they have, but some others haven't. The other thing which companies should do, definitely the last area of our resilience, and the foundational is physical. Now, physical has always been thought of as an additional area. My suggestion is, if they want an ROI or want to talk about it, tying up with insurance companies, tying up with fitness trackers, tying up about their daily rituals, giving them incentives for fitness. I think there is a huge benefit there. Mental and emotional areas, I think it's a little harder to catch, but I really would see companies becoming more purposeful to drive purposeful changes, to be less spending money or unconscious things, driving conscious behaviors, and focusing really on the health.
Yeah.
You know, starting people come to the office, have a yoga session going on, letting people to close their eyes in the afternoon for a power nap, allowing some benches like Google has done to where people can relax. You know, these are the starting journey. Emotional, mental people own their own journey. So that's what organization.
You know, exactly. You know, and I think what you're saying, right, is that the governments and companies need to be able to give people the opportunity, right? To, you know, because if the opportunity is there, then it's up to the individual on whether or not they're actually going to do something about it, right? You know, and a great conversation I had with an HR guy, you know, many years ago. He kind of said it. He said that, you know, performance is in the realm of the organization, but things like health and mental health and stuff is really in the realm of the individual, right? So they can only go so far with regards to, you know, kind of trying to inspire and motivate, you know, people. You can't tell a person they have to be healthier, right? So they kind of, you know, there's that ethical bridge that kind of needs to be overstepped, right? Or it can't be overstepped, right? And I totally agree with that too. But I do think that most companies still today, because they're underestimating, you know, the importance of self-care and, you know, resilience and things like that, that they're not modeling it enough, right? They're not they're not articulating it, and they're not showing through their behavior, you know, how this is such an important thing. And we know from a leadership perspective, right, that you know, if you don't lead by example, your population of people are not going to follow suit, and we see that in the news today, right? You know, of you know, things happening like that, right? And so where I think companies could take this a step further, and maybe after COVID they might be, because I do hear, you know, as I'm talking with a lot of companies, there's one big lesson I think that a lot of corporations have learned from this whole COVID period, is that a corporation is nothing more than its people. And, you know, if you take away the people from an organization, there is no organization. And I think you know, with this whole, you know, working from home thing and having empty offices, right, that what kept companies afloat was the people. It wasn't the office. It wasn't the servers that have spent, you know, how many millions of dollars and going up into the cloud and, you know, doing and all of those procedures. None of that mattered anymore. It was the hearts and the souls and the passion of the people. And when I you know, kind of talk to companies, they still have that in their minds, and they're kind of like, hey, you know, when we go post-COVID, you know, we really need to do better at prioritizing our people more so than prioritizing our processes and procedures and the things that we've kind of always measured as an ROI, right? You know, and so I do anticipate that there might be some change in that post-COVID world, permitting, right? Yeah, that they lead by example, right?
And you took a very good point here in terms of how they lead and people focus here. If before any other question comes in, I mean, one conversation I had with one of the organizations I don't want to name is that people were rewarded for, you know, pushing numbers, pushing. And the other area which I can think of, that pushing behavior to meet targets, to lead people to become the same kind of a person, and, you know, get rewarded for performance in a different way just by numbers, is going to change. And that pushy manager should be out very quickly. Now, the reason I'm saying, because of I've worked in FMCGs, old tradition companies, and I have more clients in non-traditional companies, which are new age companies. And I can tell you, the people talk about millennials, they are very empathetic, they're very smart, they're very cognitively aligned, they're very taking care of their fitness. Most of them, maybe not sleep, but most of them are taking care of their fitness. And I feel that the new age companies are kind of a way to go. Whereas if I go to traditional companies, the managers are, you know, driving by hierarchy, by position, by numbers, and telling them if you don't do it this way, you're out, and fired, by fear and leaving your limbic brain in fight or flight all the time. It's not going to be the way to manage it. So the companies have to move towards purposeful and driving positive energy in the business by whatever you can do to make people not fearful, not let the limbic brain be always on.
Yeah, exactly.
With,
And I got a comment from Krishna, and he makes a good point. So Krishna says that I think if we focused and know our goals, mental health is not compromised, and that for a large part it's about expectations, right? That we love to have these expectations of what we want to accomplish, what we want to do, and then that tends to lead to a lot of the stress as well, right? And maybe that counts for companies as well, right? Like as you were saying, with regards to building targets and all of that kind of stuff, So I talk a lot of, and in my keynotes I talk a lot about, of course, the mind body approach, and coming from that kind of the as you can see in the background, I come from a very strong Buddhist background, right? And it's just from my martial arts upbringing. And so even though I'm a Western trained scientist, I've been heavily influenced by Taoism and things like that, which is much less based on kind of hard facts, right? And in Western science, we always talk about if you can't see it, we don't believe it, right? Western science is always we have to see it, right? If we don't see it, it doesn't exist. And the only reason why in Western science we're learning so much is because we're developing the technologies that can see more, that allow us to see deeper, allow us to see further. And so the more we can see, the more we can, it exists. And interestingly, Western science is just very often confirming the stuff that in Asian philosophies, people have been talking about for thousands of years, right? It's kind of like naturally, talking about, how we're all connected by energy and, all of these kind of things is where, Western science is like, what energy? I don't see energy, right? It's not energy. And yet we're coming slowly but surely to these conclusions. And I think a lot of this is around, if you look at, and you've done an MBA, right? And if you look at, for example, in the way that we train our kind of managers, right? And we look at business procedures and ways of building businesses. We use a very Western approach, and even Asian companies, right? They use a very Western approach. It's all very heavily data driven, right? Yeah. If there's no data, it doesn't exist, right? There has to be data. It has to be quantifiable. It has to be measurable, because otherwise, if we can't measure it, we don't want it, right? And I think one thing that we're kind of learning, right, is that there are also intangible values. There are these intangibles that we kind of inherently know that are true, and even though we might not be able to measure them, it doesn't mean they're less important. And with this whole working from home experience that we've all had, I think a lot of companies have come to realize that they have kind of overvalued a lot of the data that they've been collecting, and that a lot of this data is actually irrelevant, right? As where they've undervalued those intangibles, the things like the energy that connects us, the passion that we have, and these are just as important as the data, as that hard data, and it's our ability to connect that, right? Yeah.
I mean, you talk about the intangible things which are existing in the company. One would be there is a term called presenteeism. Presenteeism is you see people like zombies in the office. Basically, they're there, but they're not there.
That's right.
Right. Now,
they're at work, but they're not at work.
Biohacks, but we could have a biohacks which could see how many of your employees are in the presenteeism. You would be surprised. Yeah. And if you could measure the amount of laughter is equal to the amount of performance in a company, and how many touch points people meet on a regular basis, I think these biohack devices, I don't know where we're going to, but I think that could help people to see it's not the sales target. If my people are smiling more, will lead to higher numbers, people will do everything. If they are more calm and their cortisol levels in the body is lesser, I am achieving better targets, they would try to do it. Now, before the biohacks happen, if those leaders who are listening to a conversation, the
Mm-hmm.
first thing for you to do is to test your own hacking yourself. Try
Uh-huh.
to sleep one day on time, maybe 10 o'clock, 10:30, and next day
Mm-hmm.
you see how your performance shifts up. And you would realize you would be a better leader. Maybe go
Mm-hmm.
in morning for a run or for a quick 10 minutes sprint or HIT or whatever you like, take your dog
Mm-hmm.
for a walk or go in nature. You would be surprised how your whole biochemistry, your whole uh, physiological perspective will support your performance.
That's
And
right.
if imagine all the employees are doing that, that
Yeah.
means the impact and influence of empathy, connection, trust building, and achieving results, less fatigue, less presenteeism, would hugely go up. But because
Exactly.
we don't measure it, we cannot say it
That's
happens.
right. That's right. And the reason is because how we're trying to measure it, we use a Western methodology, right? Which
Yeah.
is using things like intuition, right? Like
Yeah.
try describing that in business, right? A gut feeling, right? It's like, well, we're going to make this decision. Well, based on what data? Well, on a gut feeling. It's like, who's going to want to make an investment on that, right? But the
I mean,
funny, yeah, but it's really funny
yeah, go ahead.
is they're important, and
Yeah.
and and if we ignore those things, that's when we kind of inhibit our own potential growth, right?
Yeah.
And I do agree that without having that level of resilience, having intuition, right? Having a healthy gut feeling, right?
Yeah.
Can't be possible because our intuition is going to be geared towards survival, not towards thrival, right? And you can only trust your gut if you're feeling right, if you have that level of resilience, and you're and you're happy, right? And it is quite interesting, how we are, at the cusp, right? And that's how I kind of look at this, is that we have this opportunity to say, what, we are there's this doorway. We're on a bridge at this point from going from post-COVID world to pre-COVID to post-COVID, right? And that companies now should be having a conversation. And if you're running a company and you're not having this conversation, you're
Yeah.
running behind, right? Is the conversation should be, what version of ourselves as an organization do we want to be post-COVID, right? And do we want to hold on to the things that we believed were the right way of doing things, right? Prior to COVID, or are we going to take these learning lessons, these valuable learning lessons about how it's the energy of the people, it's their passions, it's their connectedness, it's all of that kind of stuff, right? It's their resilience that has
Yeah.
has enabled them to get through this whole COVID thing. It is not
Yeah.
business strategy. It is not business vision. Your vision is screwed. It's out the window. It doesn't exist anymore because COVID took that away. Guess what you're left over with? Some really good people. And there's a big chance that you were just lucky that you had really good people, right?
So
And if you were lucky enough to have really good people, learn from that and say, hey, how can we be even luckier? What else can we do to really kind of make sure that our people stay that way? And once we go into this post-COVID world, what can we do to even strengthen that even more? And I think there will be companies that have the courage to do that, right?
yeah.
Who can say, hey, let's explore wider. Let's take this learning experience and let's expand ourselves, kind of intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. Let's expand ourselves and see what we can get out of it. And I dare to bet you that those companies that do that
I
are
mean,
going to start skyrocketing.
yeah, I
Yeah.
really agree with you that
Yeah.
those companies who will take the step forward will definitely be ahead.
Yeah.
Marcel, one, like for example, you said that the vision, the strategy is out of the picture. I would definitely agree with that. What's really left, if you have to measure something, I would suggest you measure the amount of people focus in one task. That would tell how performing people are. If
Yeah.
you can't do intuition, as Marcel was saying, maybe just say how many of us set intentions before meeting.
Yeah.
because that can drive your performance. We talk about mental imagery in mental, not health, but mental fitness, and we talk
Yeah.
about visualization. All those factors are going to play a huge role in resilient organizations. How much
Yes.
time you do reflection after the meeting?
Yeah.
Do you just run after from one meeting to the other, or you do
That's right.
45 minutes and you have 15 minutes of ritual for reflection?
Yeah.
I can tell you, if you want to thrive, if you are an employee and you want to thrive in the next time,
Yeah.
take some time for reflection every day. It can
Exactly.
game change your performance.
Exactly.
So I think these small things will matter. That's
yeah,
what
absolutely.
I'm
I agree with that, and I also think that as I talk about quality over quantity, right? And the unfortunate thing, of course, is very often when we're looking at human performance and stuff, we have a tendency to want to quantify everything. So we look at quantity, we don't look at quality, right? Because that's much more difficult to gauge. But also from an amount of working time per day, I think we've all learned through COVID that we actually don't need as many working hours in a day to get the right amount of work done, right? That it really is about quality time that you have, and if companies can kind of say, hey, listen, we're going to stop saying, hey, you know what, you have to work 12 hours a day, or 8 to 10, or whatever it is, and just start saying, work when you feel at your best, and when you don't feel at your best, work at feeling at your best, right? At do things that make you feel better, that and then when you feel good, go back to work, right? And
that's a great idea. I love it.
Yeah.
Work when you feel at your best. I love that tag.
That's right. Yeah. And it's really interesting because when people are at their best, or they can even just internally assess when they don't feel at their best, right? Because I think that's important, and the way and that's why I talk about that whole mind-body experience, because it's about doing a self-check, right? And using your body, as a parameter. Do I feel tired? Do I feel hungry? Do I feel what is my, do I feel tension? Do I feel stress? Whatever that it is that's going on in the body, we can make sure that we feel at our best, that we feel good, right, before we start a task, before we actually go do something, and that it should be okay to say, you know what, I'm not going to start on that right now because I don't feel right, I don't feel good, I need 10 minutes, I need 15 minutes to get myself there first.
Wow, beautiful.
Right? Yeah, and I think that's the company of the future, right? Is a company that encourages that, right? Rather than just kind of saying, well, I don't care if you don't feel well. You still, these are the deadlines. This is what needs to be met, and this is all, and I think that's what Krishna was kind of talking about, expectations, right? Because people have to then kind of, meet these deadlines and expectations and all of that kind of stuff, and that's when their sense of self-control starts to disappear, right? And when they don't feel like they're in control, it raises uncertainty levels, which then of course raises stress, and that's therefore decreases our resilience, and and it's just not very helpful at all, right? So I'm actually really excited about the future prospects of organizational development and organizations, and it'll be really interesting to see which companies actually learn from this, and which choose not to, right? Because there'll be some of those too, right? That just can't do anything but hold on to the old ways of doing things, and and that will make it, again, another great case study, right? Yeah. So it's
any other questions come up? Let's see, have a look.
No, not right now. So I can actually just, let me see. I'll just type in here, say.
As you're typing, I would say, Krishna, one more thing. If you have to manage, I really like the point Marcel said about being at your best as a leader. And one thing I learned is not to take pragmatic decisions or actions when we are not at our best. So 7 p.m. when I'm already tired and I have gone for a run and maybe not rested after the run or cycling, I don't even reply to emails, because I know my emotions at that time is a bit of fatigued and tired, and so we have to have our own boundaries, so that when we are at the best, we reply in much pragmatic way with the right emotional, and the language will show up. The time when your friend has sent you a WhatsApp and he's not at his best, just by looking at the text, you know he was not at his best, right?
Yeah.
So I think we can do a favor for ourselves to find a resilience. To, as Marcel said, we call it as the same thing. What you say, Marcel, we call it biological insight. To have a biological insight on yourself,
Yeah.
on how
Yeah.
is my body feeling,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
am I
Introspection. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
introspection,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
if I can check in, and if I can see, am I on a scale of 1 to 10, less than 5, no need to reply. Yeah, just take
Yeah.
few cents of that. Make sure you have a glass of water. You know, those 10 seconds rule is a game changer as well.
I wholeheartedly agree. And coming to think about it, right, from a kind of everyday leadership, perspective, right? Thinking that we all play a leadership role, right? And that can come back to Darian's comment as well. Is I think the from a human psychology standpoint, right? If you look at the three primary motives that all living beings on this planet share the same three motives, right? The first one is to consume and conserve as much energy as possible. Right, that every animal on this planet shares that motive. The second one is to avoid pain and discomfort. Right, we all share that same thing. And then the third is, if the other two are satisfied, then the third is to seek pleasure. Right.
What's the first one again?
To seek pleasure.
What's the first one you said?
The first one is to consume and conserve as much energy as possible. Right. Yeah.
Good.
And so these are our three primary motives. And all of our behavior, all of our decisions, right, are built around these three motives, right? So actually, that's how simple we are as beings, right? But think about it. If you want to develop a multi-million-dollar product that's going to make you tons of money, right? What you really want to do is you want to come up with a product that can satisfy all three of those motives. If you can come up with a product that does that, you're going to make a ton of money because everybody's going to want it, right? If it saves you time, it saves you energy, it's easy to use, there's no pain at it, it's affordable because it's cheap, because that's no pain, right? And it actually kind of gives you that more time to be able to apply yourself. People go, yeah, man, it's like a no-brainer. I'll pay for that, right? Yeah, and but the interesting thing about that is that there's a flip side to that, is that we also don't want to hold ourselves responsible for what we're responsible for in life. We have a tendency to want to all hold other people or other things responsible. So it's very easy for a human brain, right, to want to hold their employer, want to hold that company or even that government responsible for the situation that they are in. Right, it's like, so it's like, oh, it's you guys' fault. You're not taking good care of us, or or any of that kind of stuff. But in truth, though, is that's also partly on us, right? And that's we need to take some form of responsibility about how how we're dealing with the situation and how we are adapting, and to be able to say, what role do I play in this, right? And if I'm not happy with the way the organization, for example, the decisions that they're making, or in this case even the government, do something about it, right? Stand up, speak up. Start an initiative yourself. Do something active rather than expecting somebody else to do it for you, understanding that all you're doing is you're responding to a primal driver in your brain, because that's what we all want to do. And we do that in relationships, right? When we're upset with each other, for example, it's like, a really common thing is, you make me angry, right? For example, or you make me frustrated, where in reality, of course, it's not, right? We make ourselves angry, right? We're making ourselves angry at the way we're viewing a certain situation, right? But we like to say, you make me angry, because what that does, it removes responsibility, right, from us to be able to do something about it. We can say, well, listen, it's your responsibility, so you have to remove my anger. I'm not going to do anything at all, right? and that's that human brain's desire to conserve energy, and that's really normal, right? And we all have that. And I think also a very important part of that self-leadership is understanding that in order for us to be able to kind of achieve these higher level goals, we're going to have to be able to overcome these very primal drivers that can potentially hold us back, right? And naturally having that awareness, as you mentioned so rightfully earlier, about just always having that self-awareness, that self-check with yourself, in terms of kind of saying, hey, listen, am I really looking at this rationally? Can I really kind of be, or am I just being a slave of those three kind of primary motives, right? And can I apply myself differently, right?
Just wanted to add on the small point on responsibility. And you said we park responsibility to others. Sometimes we park responsibility away by blaming ourselves, and then it's parked somewhere else. You're not taking action on it. So that's also an addition, because sometimes they say, oh, I'm guilty. Okay, then it's parked in that guilty box or the self-blame box. And what we found in resilience, self-criticism is one of the key risk factors that can take us down the road of our performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we don't negate the fact that we blame others, but also blaming ourselves can be a huge detrimental factor for your personal level of resilience.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially I think with high performers, right? I see that so much in my coaching, is people who live in kind of high performance environments. They tend to be very critical of themselves.
Yeah,
right.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, and there seems to be kind of like this. We always need to be critical, and I'm also wondering if that's kind of driven by society, but also the way a lot of companies work, right? Because companies are always, listen, I want you to be bitter. You have to be bitter. You have to be bitter, rather than you have to just be you, right? You have to be okay with being a human being. Right, and human beings are flawed animals, right? We're not designed to be perfect, right? We have a great capacity to be able to learn, right? But we're having this expectation, as Krishna kind of mentioned earlier, right? Kind of having that expectation on that things need to run a certain way or need to be, but rather having just that self-acceptance, and being able to, I agree, yeah.
And most of the coaching also, I realized this area of self-acceptance and having a full awareness of accepting yourself, all parts of you, the good, the bad, the fat, the ugly, is the foundation for you to find a higher level of performance, leadership, connection with others. If you're not accepting yourself in either form, and also treating yourself poorly compared to how you treat your friends, it's basically you're having a very poor relationship with yourself emotionally,
toxic
your
sometimes.
mental dialogue. So when you talk about mental health, Krishna, the biggest challenge people who are in depression is their thoughts are going so much against themselves. They say that, I want to do something poor to myself. Because they become their biggest enemy themselves. Now that would be if a learning from this session would be that for us to manage, of course, a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual well-being, but the first is not to criticize myself so much that I become my biggest enemy and I have lower shoulders and my chin is down and no smile, because it's my own expectation of myself. So I think that's a good summary to catch up on the question, which went on for a while.
I know.
Anything
But hey,
came up?
Yeah, exactly. And so and when you look at resilience, right? And we're almost coming at the top of the hour here. So so just kind of just for the last few minutes, when we're looking at resilience too, I think what you're saying, right, is that a lot of our resilience is really built on the language that we speak to ourselves, right? And that's a very important, and then it goes from the language to rituals, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So right, so I think if we start with the right language that comes from a place of self-compassion, right? Non-violent compassion, right? You
Well
know, as
said.
you come from a background of non-violent communication, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. So, you know, but yeah, so being able to have that compassionate conversation of acceptance, right? You know, and where you're okay with being, you know, a flawed animal, so to speak, and then being able to from there being able to apply those rituals, right? Whatever those rituals are that you need to do to be able to kind of apply yourself. That's when those levels of resilience are you know going to go up, right? And I think
Absolutely.
that would be a
And
great takeaway. Yeah.
yeah, even before the ritual, start to observe yourself. Have
Yep.
a
Beautiful.
watch out on yourself when you go thinking in dinner at this time in the webinar. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts telling you?
Yeah.
Where is your energy now? How are you feeling at this time? I
Yeah.
mean, that's having that little bit of a reflection camera on yourself before you start the ritual. So of course self-criticism is also for you to see, observing that I'm criticizing. A lot of
That's right.
leaders don't even notice that there's
That's
a
right.
voice inside of the head is shooting themselves every minute.
Exactly. Exactly. Brilliant.
So that's a
Hey,
good summary. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely, Manish. This was such a fun session, and you know, thank you so much for joining. Like as I mentioned before the session, we can probably talk for days, right? You know, but I think the two big takeaways is you know, if you really want to focus on resilience, is you know, look at how you're observing yourself, look at the language that you're speaking to yourself, and then being able to apply, you know, small rituals, right? You know, repetition is what's going to make you more resilient at the end of the day, without necessarily having an expectation that building that resilience is going to come from others, right? You know,
Yeah.
and it's that kind of taking charge first, right? You know, that's really going to help us build that.
Yeah.
You know
And
what? Thank you so much, Manish. This was a fantastic session. You know, we should do this again sometime. I really enjoy chatting with you. It's so much fun. Yeah. And thank you also to Krishna and Darian for making comments. Always good to do. You know, hopefully we'll be able to have this conversation again sometime.
thank you, and thanks
Yeah.
for hosting. It was fun and quite lively. Didn't realize how the 1 hour
It's amazing,
passes
isn't
by.
it?
And,
Yeah, I know.
yeah, and your knowledge on neuroscience and giving the three perspective of staying in the comfort zone and trying
Uh-huh.
something pleasurable. I thought that's my takeaway as well in terms of learning. I didn't know you had Buddhist background, so good to hear. Would love to get some stories back on.
Oh
Thanks,
yeah, sure.
everyone.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody. So and thank you Manish. I'm gonna go back to my single screen now. So this was another episode of Everyday Leadership. Manish was fantastic. What a great wealth of knowledge that he can share with us. And of course, connect with him on LinkedIn, Manish Arneja, and of course, feel free to connect with me if you have any questions or whatever. Manish is a really approachable guy. You know, just shoot him a question or whatever through LinkedIn or whatever social network that you like to be using, and he'll always be open to having a conversation with you about it and try to help you out just as much as for me as well. So I just want to thank you so much for watching today. Next week I have a amazing session lined up with Dr. Philip Mary, and Dr. Philip Mary has done groundbreaking research on synchronicity, and synchronicity is what connects all of us together, and that's what he did his PhD in, and I can't wait to have a great conversation with him. He is again such a world of knowledge, and what that will be next week. You'll hear more from me about that in the next few days. Thank you so much everybody for watching, and I will see you next week. See you. Bye.